Hi everyone, I'm Sunny Jim. I'm going to be doing a very basic intro to bookmaking or bookbinding workshop today. I learned how to make books more than 20 years ago in college, back before there was YouTube for anything you wanted to learn how to do. And this book has an advantage in that it doesn't require any gluing, so we don't have to wait for any glue to dry. These are known as non-adhesive binding techniques, but this will give you the foundations that will stretch across many different styles of bookbinding, historic, modern, various cultures. A lot of these things are going to be in common. So first, let's talk about this project that we've got going today, which is this very simple little book. There was a materials list that I sent out, but we're going to cover that very exhaustively here because the materials in this case are in many cases substituting for real things, and I just want to cover that a little bit. You're going to need a cutting mat, something that you don't want to scratch up your table with knives. Metal ruler. The reason it should be metal and not plastic or wood is that when you run a knife blade along the edge of the ruler, you don't want the knife blade to cut into the ruler. You want it to slide along nicely. If you've got one of those wood rulers that has the metal strip in the edge, that'll do. You're going to want a ruler that has really nice, clear measurement indications. You're going to want to be able to measure 16ths or even in some cases 32nds of an inch. You're going to need some kind of cutting blade. For bookbinding, this is my preferred type of blade, these snap-off blades, because again, you're running your blade along a metal edge. It dulls it fast. And these guys, you can just snap off a couple sections and stick some more out. It's easy to get replacements. You can get a pack of 3 or 4 of these for $1 at the dollar store. They're just really conveniently available and the right tool for the job in this case. If you don't have one of those, you can use an X-Acto knife, use any other kind of blade that you want to use for cutting paper. Speaking of paper, we're going to need some paper. In this case, we're going to use a dozen sheets of just standard 8.5 by 11 paper. It's nice if it's resume weight, that kind of heavier bond with a little bit of texture in it. The reason being that regular copy paper is really made to be kind of disposable, and it can rip easier when you sew the signatures. The space between your stitches can tear out fairly easy on copy paper. But for learning how to do it, copy paper is fine. You can even go through your recycle bin and find a dozen sheets of whatever to learn on. I frequently use recycle bin paper when I'm teaching this because I have plenty of these little books and don't actually need a ton more of them. We're going to be cutting it down too, so it's fine. Let's see here. You're going to need a little piece of cardstock. And when I say piece of cardstock, I don't mean 8.5 by 11. I mean, you're going to need a piece of 5-inch by 2-inch cardstock. This is a template. You can use a piece of cardstock from like a political mailer or an ad, those old Bed Bath & Beyond coupons that we always used to get. That's great material for this. This is our punching template for punching holes in our signatures. I'm going to need some heavy duty thread. Buttonhole thread is great for this. I frequently use nylon thread that I also use in shoemaking because it's really strong, but it is kind of thin. I really think buttonhole thread is the best. If you don't have buttonhole thread, I mean, you could use embroidery floss. I would probably pull it down to maybe 3 strands instead of the full thickness of embroidery floss, 2 or 3 strands. Other options would be regular sewing thread, but I would double or maybe even triple it up because it's so thin that it just cuts through paper, especially copy paper, almost like a knife. You're going to need a needle. This is, you've got some sewing to do. I took a picture of a needle on my hand here to give you an rough idea of scale. You need a needle that is going to be big enough to be useful and be able to get that buttonhole thread through the eye fairly easily. If you don't have an awl, you'll also be using this to punch your holes. So it's nice to have a slightly larger needle for that with a really pointy end. If you've got a good awl for punching your holes, you can use a tapestry needle with a more rounded tip, as long as you can get it through the holes that you punched. And you don't want it to be so big that it's enlarging the holes as it goes through. You're going to need some kind of awl or poking tool. The one on the left here, with this this white plastic handle and little metal pokey thing, the one that I have that I've used for ages and ages has a blue handle, and I got it in the student bookstore 25 years ago. It was in the science section. They were, you know, like 49 cents at the time, and they called it a probe. I think it's for doing dissections in biology lab. But basically, you just need some kind of pokey thing that has a handle on it so you can easily poke some holes through paper. Sorry, I just saw a cat dump a mostly finished jigsaw puzzle off a table, and I feel really bad about that, but there's nothing I can do about it right now. You're gonna need a pencil or maybe a pen. You're gonna need a large piece of construction paper of some kind. The kind of paper that I like to use is, it's a high-end art paper that's used for things like pastels and charcoal drawings. If you don't just happen to have a supply of that in your house, regular construction paper is fine, although regular construction paper, like that you might get for your kids, is a little bit delicate. And when you're done making your cover, which looks kind of like this, you might want to laminate the outside of it with clear packing tape to make it stronger. You can also use like brown craft paper or paper grocery sacks or large format calendar page, just anything that's at least 11 inches by 15 inches. You could even piece things together. Again, if you've got packing tape, you can totally make this work out of whatever Frankenstein paper you've got lying around. You just need at least 11 by 15 of some kind of paper that you can like mark on one side of. You're gonna need something for the tapes. We are sewing this book onto tapes, and what that means is the actual pages here are held in by being stitched onto this material here, which is, in my case, these guys are that strapping material off of paper cases. It's pretty stiff, and yet it's still flexible, and that's what you're looking for. So if you're trying to kludge together something to make a book today, I've got a lot of suggestions. We've got plastic strapping. It's also used for handles sometimes on large boxes like cat litter. It's literally garbage, so if you're out in the world looking for it, pretty much any office that buys paper by the case will be happy to give it to you. Down here in Olympia, I have swung by the print shop for the state government, and they're like, you want that stuff? Yeah, here's our garbage can. Feel free to grab as much as you want. They're always perplexed as to what I want it for and how I'm going to use it. If you can't get your hands on that, you can also use things like some very thin cardboard covered with some masking tape or packing tape or duct tape. Make sure to cut it, you know, a little bit smaller so that it's not super huge. You could use packing tape around paper. Again, you're going for this sort of flexible but stiff. Like if you hold it out like this, it doesn't droop. If you've got something that you just bought at Costco that came in one of those big useless plastic blister packs, you might be able to find a section of blister pack that is 1/4 inch wide by 6 inches long that you can cut out. If you do that, I would sand the edges ever so slightly with a little bit of fine-grained sandpaper so that they're not sharp. You don't want the tapes to be sharp enough to cut the thread. I've also thought possibly you could use ribbon. In order to make that stiffness, you'd want to like soak it in some white glue so that it's nice and stiff. If you've got other ideas, feel free to be creative. Actual books that people make now and that people have made historically have used a wide variety of things to sew the signatures onto. They've used jute cord, ribbon, seam binding, bias tape. I've seen some really artistic stuff done. One of my example books that I will show you here is a photo album that I made several years ago that has the signatures sewn on to grosgrain ribbon, which is then run through the cover to adhere the pages in. That's how the pages are held into this book, is that they are sewn onto these grosgrain ribbons. So that's an option. Zip ties might work. If they are, you know, the sort of thinner ones, not the really big, bulky, super heavy duty construction ones. I would stick with like a standard 1/4 inch zip tie. So step one, we're gonna assemble our signatures. We're going to start by stacking the paper so that it's all very carefully aligned. I want to make sure that all the edges are jogged together nicely. You're going to put it down on your cutting board and cut 1 inch off the long side. And here's how we're going to do that. Here's a little video clip of how to do that. You're going to line up your ruler. You can mark your 1 inch marks first and use that, or if you've got a cutting mat with lines, you can just use the lines on the cutting mat. The trick here is to draw the knife lightly down the edge of the metal ruler over and over and over again until you've cut through all the layers. And I'm going to play that one more time because we're going to do this. This is how you would trim a text block. It's how you would cut any number of sheets of paper, large stacks, small stacks. This is the method for cutting stacks of paper. So you're going to do that, cut 1 inch off the long side, and then you're going to turn that stack 90 degrees and cut it in half, which will be at the 5.5 inch mark, to make now 24 sheets of paper that are 7 inches by 5.5 inches. Now, as folks are doing that, you might wonder, why are we cutting down this 1 inch from the long side? And the answer to that is just that I find this proportion or this proportion slightly more attractive than the proportions that you would get from simply folding an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper into quarters, which is this. So instead of this, we're going to get something that's just a little bit narrower and taller. Your mileage may vary. In the future, after this, you will have the mental tools to make whatever size you want, so you don't have to just do it the way I'm showing you this time. And then the next thing you're going to do, once you have your 24 sets, 24 sheets of paper, you're going to stack them in sets of 3 so that you have 8 sets of 3, and fold each one in half to make a 5.5 by 3.5 inch signature. So while folks are doing that, I'll let you know this sheet of paper, this is a sheet. When you fold a sheet in half, now it's a signature. If you have many sheets of paper that are folded in half together, it's still a signature. So we're going to be sewing signatures together. When you sew together a bunch of signatures, you get a text block. There's a little bit of vocabulary. And that vocabulary is going to be very similar regardless of what kind of book you're making. Speaking of other kinds of books you could make, we're going to be sewing signatures on, but you don't have to. There are some fun options of other arrangements. You could take your cover that you make, and you could, like this little book here, which we used as a guest book at one point, you could just accordion fold a bunch of paper and add that into a cover and make a book. You could accordion fold things. Here's another little book. You could accordion fold it so that it expands in unpredictable ways. Like that. And then there's a woman named Heidi Kyle who developed something called the Heidi Kyle flip book, where you open your book and you've got your pages, but then if you fold the whole thing out flat, it comes together as one picture. Is it everybody who can't see me, or is it just one person? Okay, so we'll see if we can get that up and running. Another option, other than sewing signatures onto tapes, is to just stab through. This is what's known as a stab binding, because it stabs through the cover and is just the signatures sewn directly onto each other. And there are no tapes involved on this. So that's historically, I think it's more of an Asian technique, but that's another format that you can look at if you are interested. Of course, the simplest of books have a signature. Here's one. This is about the simplest book you can make. There's a signature inside. It's got pages. The cover is just a sheet of paper. The signatures have been sewn to one half. It's been folded over, and that makes a very simple cover. We're going to do a little more complicated today. So I'm assuming that you probably just about got your 8 sets of 3 pages folded in half, more or less. So next we're going to talk about making our template. There's our little cardstock template, and stitching and punching through this template onto our signatures. So here we've got our 5.5 by 2 inch piece of cardstock. We're going to fold it in half the long way. You want that nice fold. You're going to mark with your ruler starting from the ends. You're going to go in 1/2 inch, 1.5 inches, and 1 3/4 inch from each end and make a mark in that fold. Then you're going to take one of your signatures. You will insert the template into the signature so that you have a nice guide there, and use your pokey tool. There's the pokey tool to poke through the marks and through the signature and poke holes in all 8 of your signatures. And do each signature individually. If you're doing it right, if you're lucky, if it all goes exactly as planned, as you're poking the tool through, the paper of each layer will press outward and will help hold the signature together ever so slightly, holding it in place so that when you're trying to sew, you can sew in from the outside, and all of those holes will stay nicely lined up because the paper is kind of smooshed out together, holding it together. if you don't have a fancy pokey tool like this, feel free to use your sharp needle. Repeat that on all of the signatures. So the next thing we're going to do is sew the signatures onto our tapes. I'm trying to think, I should let some folks catch up. Go back for half a sec. What part, is there a specific part that we need more time or more info for, or just more time? Good now. Okay. I'm going to assume that if John's keeping up, that anyone else who's doing it is also keeping up. Okay. While you are punching holes, I will show you a couple other little books. Here's a kind of a fun thing. When I was in school, we called this German medieval. I don't know if it's genuinely German or genuinely medieval. I haven't checked up on that. But as you're stitching in and out through the spine of your signatures, you have the opportunity to, you can of course make all of the holes line up, and you will get that. You'll get a band across the top, and your signatures will be stitched on all in a row. If you want, you can get a little fancy and do something like this. This was on the very last one. I just wrapped the thread around all of those vertical lines to make a little X instead. Very simple decorative element. On this one, I did that twice to get a little decorative element. And then if you don't punch the holes all in the same place, if you really want to go crazy, you can figure it out ahead of time and punch holes in different spots. And then you can get bindings that do things like this, where you can actually run a chain stitch in between the signatures and do what, again, when I was in school, we referred to this as German medieval binding. And that is, the signatures are stitched through the tape, and in this case, also stitched through a piece of Tyvek up the back. If I was doing this, if this was historically accurate and I was trying to be historically accurate, that would probably be leather or some other kind of more structurally sound paper. In this case, again, it's Tyvek because, well, we're the masters of reusing garbage at my school where I learned how to do this. Another option for a cover, here's a very simple book, very thin book. It has, pages inside which are sewn just with thread along the spine of a single piece of cardstock. So this is just a single piece of cardstock wrapped around and sewn down. The one signature is sewn in. Another option is to make a cover that you sew your signatures together just to themselves, no tapes at all. I'm going to pull this one out. So here's a little text block. It's 2 signatures, and they are stitched only to themselves. And then for the cover, it's a rectangle of nice stiff paper with tabs top and bottom. And then this text block is inserted. And the last page of the text block gets inserted into the tabs on the cover. It slides on in there. And that's another way of attaching a text block to a cover. So if you had a cover you particularly liked and you filled up the text block, or you wanted to use it for your grocery shopping lists and ran through it, or if your toddler colored all over it and you needed a new text block but the cover was still fine, you can just make a new text block and use that same cover over and over again. And that works for a little book like that. Here's another example of that same strategy where it just fits over the last page of the text block. So I'm hoping that everyone is good with punching their holes. We're going to talk about sewing the signatures onto tapes, and I made a very boring video of this. You're going to need some thread. How much thread are you going to need? You will measure out a nice tail, and then as many times as there are signatures, this length. So I usually hold my little text, I put my text block on the table and I hold the thread and I go 1, 2, 3 until I get 8. And that's going to be enough thread because it's only going from a 1/2 inch in to a 1/2 inch in. So if you do that and maybe be a little generous on it, you'll have plenty. So once you get your needle threaded and you've got all of your signatures stacked up, I will also preface this video by saying that I do not have a tripod. I have a gooseneck craft lamp that I tied my iPhone to, and this is the first time I've ever videoed myself doing anything, and I couldn't see what was being videoed. So I apologize. There's a few times that my hands get kind of off the side, and it's a little bit harder to see what's going on. So you've got your stack of signatures, and you've got your needle and thread. You're going to start by going from the outside, very important, from the outside to the inside of your first signature, coming out the next hole. Now, because these tapes are really stiff, they kind of flap around in awkward ways. We're not going to put the tape in just yet. That's where it's going to go. Go back in. You're basically leaving a little loop that tape is going to go through when we get to the next signature. So there's that little loop that the tape is going to go through. Go back in from the outside, again making a little loop and coming out the top. Now you're going to add the next signature. Now we're starting from the top because we're at the top. I'm going to again go in from the outside. This is where I was saying it's a bonus if when you punch the holes, it kind of spreads that paper out and keeps them all nicely lined up. Otherwise, you end up doing a lot of that, which is really aggravating. So again, you go in from the top, you're going to come out the next hole. Sorry about the off screen. You'll see it here in a second. You're going to push that tape through the little loop that you've just made on both the first and second signature. And that would be the shadow of a cat. And then again, you're going inside to the outside around that tape, back into the inside of the signature. And because these papers separated, it's really hard to find the hole and get it through properly, but get it here in a second. This thread will be frustrating. It will loop around everything else every time, and you just have to keep pulling those loops out so that it goes where it needs to go. Here you can see I've kind of put the tape in. Now we're going to do the bottom one, going out through that hole. Around the tape, back in. And then back out through that bottom hole. And now it's important to really snug this up. You don't want there to be a lot of play in threads. You're going to pull both ends of that thread so that it gets nice and snug. Don't tear the paper, but just short of that. And then you're going to tie it in a very secure knot at the bottom corner there. Now you're going to grab your third signature. And again, starting from the bottom, whoops, I flipped that out again, so that's going to be a pain. Starting from the bottom, you're going to go in from the outside, just getting that hole lined up properly there. From the outside to the inside here. Going around the tape and back in. We're going to do the first 4 signatures on the video here because there's some important points. Back out and around the second tape. And then out from the inside to the outside on that top hole. Now, this is really important. How do you attach this top to the signatures next to it? What you do is you insert the needle between signature 1 and signature 2 underneath that loop of thread. And now you're going to go into the top of the 4th signature. This is all old letterhead from a job I had 20 years ago. Again, coming out from the inside and around the tape. If you go on YouTube, you will find hundreds of videos of people doing this with various equipment, with various tapes, with various papers, with cordage. They sew them sometimes just around like we're doing. Sometimes they do a loop-de-loop. Sometimes they make the holes with saws, you know, taking the whole text block and cutting a little channel, which makes the hole. There's a variety of ways of doing this. All just kind of depends on what final look you want. Here again, to attach at the bottom to make sure that all these signatures are really well attached to each other. We're going to squeeze everything down and go now between signature 2 and signature 3. Go around that loop. And we're going to keep doing that until we get all the way to the end, all 8 signatures sewn together. And there I am off the camera again. So that's where we are now with the first 4. We're going to keep going until we have all 8 signatures sewn together. And when we get to the end, again, you want to really snug that tight and tie a really good knot to tie it off and keep it snug. If you're having trouble keeping the signatures really connected to each other, you can do something like what I was doing with some of these guys, where when you go around the tape, you can take an opportunity to tie it to the one next to it at various points in the middle, as well as just the top and bottom. So that's an option. That would be a little bit more like that German medieval binding with the crazy loops that go back and forth and connect everything. If you are sewing your signatures, just because we've got some folks who aren't in real time with us here, I'm going to go ahead and move on to how we're going to make the cover. So we are making a non-adhesive cover. This is the overall shape that it ends up as. It folds in like this. And then these weirdo tabs go into these slots like that. So it ends up making this kind of nice triangle shape. And when we are done with our text block, the tapes go through those holes in the spine and then in through the slits in the outside of the cover, which I'm not sure if you can see here, but you'll see it on the diagram. There are some slits on the cover that those tapes go back through so that they are concealed. And this is kind of how it ends up looking on the back, is that there's that slit that the tapes go into. And there's that triangular shape with tabs. There's one of the tapes sticking out through. So as you look at my diagram here for the cover, you're going to see a bunch of different colors and kinds of lines. The solid blue lines are just guidelines. That's all they're there for, is to be guides. The dashed lines are the fold lines, and the black lines are where we're going to cut. And there's some reasons for that, which you will see. So if you get out your big piece of construction paper or paper bag or whatever, basically draw a line horizontally and vertically through the center. And I will wait a moment for people to catch up and do that, because that does take a minute. Don't fold it to find the center. Do please measure. Just kind of trying to leave enough time for people to catch up. The second thing you're going to do is we're going to mark where the spine is. Now, I've done this a lot of times, so I can tell you that 8 signatures of copy paper or resume weight paper, that's going to be about 3/8 of an inch. So what you're doing here is you're essentially measuring the spine of your text block. So if you had a much thicker text block, this would need to be wider. And you're going to make 2 lines that are about that far apart. This is something that there's always someone who doesn't quite understand. So I'm going to try to explain. It doesn't matter really where that middle guideline is, as long as you have your 2 fold lines 3/8 of an inch apart. So you can go 3/16 of an inch out on either side from your center line, or you can just pick a direction and go 3/8 of an inch and use that previously center line as your fold line. Just keep track of, you need to know which lines specifically are the edge of your spine. So that 3/8 inch total gap, edge of your spine, you're going to be measuring and referencing that line a lot. So go ahead and make a 3/8 inch, 2 parallel lines 3/8 inch apart in about the middle of your paper. If you're using a standard piece of construction paper, you've got extra space on the ends. So being dead center is really less important than getting 3/8 of an inch very nicely. The next measurement we're going to do is from that spine line, from the edge of the spine, not the center of the spine, from the edge of the spine, we're going to go 3 7/8 inch, which is the width of the text block plus 1/8 of an inch. Let me make sure of my measurement there, because I've done this a number of times. Oh, I think I have an error earlier on. Our final page size is like 3 3/4, not 3.5 inches. I do this backwards about every time. So you're going to measure your text block and give yourself an extra 1/8 of an inch. This here. Yep, 3 7/8. That's Yep, that's correct. 3 7/8 inch. And I will fix in the PowerPoint presentation, I will fix that earlier place where I said that the page size is 3.5. It should be 3 3/4. The first time I'm doing this as an online class, there's bound to be a measurement mistake someplace. And you're going to measure that out on both sides. The reason why we're doing the width of the text block plus 1/8 of an inch, if you ever like grab a hardcover book off your shelf, you'll notice that the covers are just a little bit bigger than the pages inside, and it helps protect the pages. You need a little bit more on the leading edge of the book than you do on the top and bottom, which will become apparent as we do that later on. The next measurement that you're going to do is going to be about 2 3/4 inch. It's less than that total width of the text block. You just don't want this end bit to be really long, because then when you fold it over on this fold line, it'll start to bump up against the spine, and you don't want that. You want it to be a little bit less than the width of the text block. I went about 1 inch less because I just like the way it looks. I think it looks nicer that way. We're going to pause for a moment and see if people need to catch up. Okay, so now we're going to get some heights going here. Now you need to take the height of your text block and add about 1/8 of an inch. That's 1/8 of an inch total to the height of your text block. So from that center line, you're going to go up 2 13/16, which is an absurd amount to measure. This is basically 2 3/4 plus 1/16 of an inch, if that's the way you think about it. Again, on the top and bottom, you want a little bit less overhang than on the front edge. You don't want your text block to be weighting down and pulling against. If you put your book on the shelf, standing upright like this, you don't want the text block to have such a gap that it's actually pulling on the spine as it tries to rest somewhere. You want it to be pretty close to the ground level, but just not quite, just that tiny bit of protection. So we're going to go 1/16 on either end on the top and bottom, and draw those horizontal lines. And then the really crazy fun parts. You're going to connect the intersection of these two fold lines here with the intersection of the guideline, the center line, and the guideline out here at the end into a diagonal triangular shape, and you're going to do that on both sides. To make the tabs, we're going to measure in about 1 inch on either side on each of these diagonals, and it doesn't have to be exactly 1 inch. This is a little bit up to your personal preference. I think that with this particular size, about 1 inch is a fairly good size. It gives you a nice tab with good gripping power. It's nicely balanced. I wouldn't go too much bigger or too much smaller than 1 inch. Regardless, I usually just use the corner of a piece of paper to get a nice 90-degree angle there, and make a perpendicular line up to either the fold line or the guideline. And you're going to do that on all 4 spots to make those 90-degree tabs. Here are our exterior cut lines. And there are some things to note as you keep drawing your tabs, because that'll probably take a minute. When it comes time to cut this out, you don't necessarily have to draw these finer points, but you want to be aware. Here you can see on this top edge that the cut line does not exactly match this fold line. The cut line angles in ever so slightly. That's maybe 1/8 of an inch. The reason for that is that when you actually fold this part down and then fold this part in, having a little extra room in here makes it fold nicer. It doesn't bind up and give you extra bulk in this fold, which is helpful. Oh, and another point about that, if you are using a much larger piece of construction paper, or if you are making a smaller text block, the height of this portion here, from this fold line here to the top edge, needs to be no more than the measurement from the center line to the fold line. On this size of paper, an 11-inch tall size of paper, you're going to have a small gap in between, which is fine. I think it does actually look more attractive if there is, in fact, no gap in between. I don't know how readable that is. I can get a shadow in there. If these two are flush to each other right there at the point, I think that looks really nice, but it is hard to get those larger sizes of paper without spending a lot of money on paper that you're just going to cut up and throw away most of. So that's why we angle in these top edges just a little bit here. For the same reason, when you cut around your tabs, you're going to cut these horizontal and vertical lines. You're going to cut them just a little bit inside the actual marked fold line and guideline here. And again, that's just so that when you fold this up, there's a little tiny bit of ease in between the fold line there. And it's just nice to have it be even, so I do it both against the fold line and on that guideline. So once we've got those cut lines made up, we have a few more measurements and marks to make. The best way, I think, to get the locations of where the tapes are going to go is just to lay the text block on top of the paper and mark where they're going to go. That way, if there's been any kind of mix-up or anything, you'll get it sorted out. So I've got one where I actually, let's see, I think it's this one, where it's not even on the top and bottom. And so it was important to not just assume that it was, oh, it's going to be 1 inch here and 1 inch here, because it's not the same amount in each place. So I will actually use my text block and as a reference to measure and mark those lines where the tapes go. Once you've got that, you're going to measure out about 1 inch on either side, again from that spine, not from the center, but from the spine, and make a little slit, make 4 little slits. And those are the little slits that the tapes go back into the spine in those locations. You're also going to cut a rectangle where the spine lines are and those tapes, because that's how they get out through the cover. And you're going to cut those lines just slightly outside of your marks that you've made. So if you've got your nice reference lines there for your tapes, you're going to cut, again, it's like maybe a 1/16 of an inch. Just cut the paper, cut the pen or pencil mark off, basically, and cut just a little bit outside the line on the spine as well. to get the slots that these tabs are going to go through, you're actually going to need to cut out all the way around and fold it up, because the best way to get that last little square is actually to fold those tops and bottoms in and mark it right through the holes that you've already cut. And then cut out those little squares. And similarly, you're going to fold these in, fold in your side tab pieces, and then you will mark the corners of the tabs on the paper underneath and connect the lines. So I will go back to this one, which has all the markings on it, and just show you how this folds together. You're going to fold the top and bottom up and down. You're going to fold these sides in, and then you will insert the tabs into their slots like that, which makes this nice triangle shape here. We're doing this without looking at it. Tabs into slots like so, and fold the spine so that you have a nice rectangular spine. Give that a nice crease along those lines. And the way to get your text block into there takes a little trick. You actually want to grab your text block and fold the tapes back like this and hold them and insert them through those little holes. And then you will insert them one at a time through the slits. Oop. Trying to do this without tearing anything. There we go. Insert them into the little slots that you cut, like that. And let's see. There we go. Slide that in. And slide that guy in there. And last one. Right there, and slide that in. And there's your little book sewn onto its tapes, all ready to go. So there's the finish, fold along dashed lines, mark flotation with tabs. This is just what we just did. And that's it for the presentation. I'm going to scroll back up to the cover page, and if anyone would like to see something specific, please feel free to let me know on the chat. I've got one more thing for you here. There are books that are hardback that I've made samples of hardback books. It's a little small sample where you've got end papers and there's tapes and everything's glued in and it's a nice little hardback. But don't discount non-adhesive binding like this one, where we made a whole cover and it's just folded up and the whole thing just holds it on by itself. I have this book, which was a textbook from college, so it's old and there are probably better reference materials now, but I still love it. It's called Non-Adhesive Binding. I know that's a super exciting title for a book. Volume 1, Non-Adhesive Binding, Books Without Paste or Glue. There's a ton of information, of course, on the internet, but there are amazingly beautiful ways to attach signatures together that are folded or that use things like wooden skewers or that are sewn or attached with unusual materials. And I would really encourage anyone who's super interested in books to take a look at some of the fantastic alternate strategies that there are other than just gluing everything together, which is certainly an option. And I think that is it. Are there questions? feel like I've been talking nonstop into the void for an hour. Well, feel free to contact me directly if you have questions. I'm sunnymakesshoes@gmail.com, and I won't promise to answer right away, but I do answer eventually. Please don't spam my email address if you're a spam bot of some kind, harvesting emails from YouTube videos. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been an experience, a learning experience. I have some ideas of ways to do this better next time. I think that's all I've got, and I will make sure that the updated PDF is available without the videos. We'll figure out a way to get that out to people if you want it, because it has all the measurements and it might be easier than watching the video over and over again. Thanks so much.